Dragon SpaceX for update.
Go ahead.
Okay, exterior, we're seeing 3 parts per million NTO and 6 parts per billion of MMH. Nil, however, is asking that you destow your Draggers and take a sample inside the cabin.
Yeah, which detector? What number, Mike?
Yeah, it'll be detectors 2 and 3 in location 14.
Copy.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
All right, so we just got the call out of the current readings of both the NTO, the nitrogen tetroxide, and the monomethyl hydrazine, either in the parts per million or the parts per billion. But just as an extra safety precaution, we heard Anil, so Anil Menon, the medical authority from SpaceX on the boat, asking the crew to take out some air detectors that they have inside with them just to do some quick sampling inside the cabin itself. So again, we've said it before, we'll continue to say it throughout: safety, the top priority with this operation. So the teams are going to be very methodical and make sure that everything is in a good setup, a safe environment, not only for the crew themselves, but also for our recovery forces. But for now, Bob and Doug still inside of Crew Dragon. We are just 58 minutes post-landing.
SpaceX Dragon with a status.
Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, for NO2 on detector 2, it reads 0.0. And on detector 3, it also reads 0.0 for MMH.
Okay, great news. 0.0 for detectors 2 and MMH. Thank you very much.
That's a good copy.
And so Doug Hurley reporting zeros across the board, no traces of either the NTO or the MMH.
Dragon SpaceX for a status update. Okay, so currently our exposure limits are below limits, but the purge is actually doing a pretty good job. We saw NTO go from 3 parts per million down to 1.5 over the last few minutes. So ideally, with a lot of caution, we'd go ahead and let the purge run for a little bit longer, but we want to see how you guys are doing. If you're okay with continuing with the purge versus knock it off and get you guys out of there quickly.
Yeah, we're fine hanging out, Mike. No problem here.
Okay, thanks for that, Doug. We'll keep working the purge to get us down, and thanks for that. Thanks for that.
Yeah, let's just keep everybody safe. No reason to rush.
Yeah, we concur.
Spacecraft Commander Doug Hurley reporting the crew still doing well in Dragon, so they are good to continue to hang out. The medical authority there on the boat recommending as long as the crew is okay and still doing well inside Dragon, they'll just continue with the purge, trying to get those trace readings of any hypergol vapors all the way down to 0. Because again, we're really focused on not only keeping the astronauts safe, but all of the recovery engineers and medical professionals there on the scene as well. So they're going to continue this purge, just dispelling the immediate area around the service section of the Dragon spacecraft. So this is really a series of fuel tanks outside of the pressure vessel, so where Bob and Doug are inside the Dragon spacecraft, which they did some quick readings inside the cabin and had zeros across the board. But they're just continuing to let these levels dissipate, bring it down to zero, and then we'll resume hatch operations. We're just a little over an hour now, an hour and 2 minutes post splashdown.
Yeah, good to hear Bob and Doug report that they're good hanging out, meaning they're feeling all right, and they're pretty comfortable staying inside for just a couple more minutes.
Yeah, they were doing their best prior to leaving of playing up their expected seasickness. So good. It is good to hear that they're doing well still inside the Dragon capsule.
And Dragon SpaceX, we're still seeing good indications from the purge. We're looking to go about another 5 minutes and looking for zero indications. If at any time you'd like us to speed things up, please let us know.
Oh, we're good. Just keep doing what you're doing. We can wait the 5. Easy.
All right, thanks, Doug.
All right, so we'll settle in at least another 5 minutes while they just continue to disperse any trace remnants of those hypergol fuels around the service section of Dragon before we once again step into the hatch opening. We're gonna stay with this until Bob and Doug are out of the capsule and into their medical quarters.
At this point, Bob and Doug are still strapped into their seats. The seats have actuated away from the position where, I guess, in the orientation in which you see the capsule now. During their during the departure phasing earlier this morning and yesterday, the orientation of the seats were such that essentially Bob and Doug would have been laying on their backs in the orientation where we see Dragon now. Currently, the seats have actuated upward slightly, so they are not completely upright. They are reclined a little bit, nice and comfy there, but they are able to see in and out of those windows there that we see on either side of the side hatch.
And then once they're able to finish the egress process, getting Bob and Doug out of the capsule, once they're in the medical area, they'll look to start bringing in the helicopter, as both Bob and Doug are going to be flown back to Pensacola via helicopter, getting them to the shore in just a matter of minutes, where a NASA plane is going to be standing by to then load them up and bring them home to Ellington Airfield at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
And Dragon SpaceX, things are still trending well. We're expecting another reading in about 2 minutes, so at 1956, and looking to hopefully egress you guys shortly after that.
Okay, sounds good, bud. Thank you.
In light of one of the social media questions that we were asked earlier, someone asked if Bob and Doug have Netflix available on their heads-up displays there in the capsule, and They've actually been pretty busy throughout this mission, monitoring telemetry and data and checking for timing. And I would say now's about the time that they would certainly want something to watch because, at this point, their only job left to do is get out of the capsule.
Has to be a feeling of just success, though, for those two. I mean, taking the first flight in a brand new spacecraft, we knew as test pilots, this is something that was kind of their bread and butter when they were in the military, and definitely something they leapt at the chance for once they became astronauts. And really a pretty flawless flight for Dragon. Obviously, we'll have all of the post-flight review coming up in the next several weeks as we continue to assess all the data that we received throughout the mission and any data still recorded locally on Dragon itself. And we'll be spending the next several weeks going through and assessing the mission and working through the certification process. And we're already targeting the first operational flight, currently pegged for no earlier than late September.
And Dragon SpaceX, we're now planning to stop the purge in 1 minute at about 19:57.
Copy. Thank you.
All right, well, with them stopping the purge in about a minute, that means that the levels have gone down to what they were looking for, and then we'll begin to step back into the hatch opening process and then be able to get Bob and Doug egressing or moving out of the Dragon capsule. They've been in there for a little more than 19 hours at this point since they departed the space station on Saturday. They had a sleep period, 8 hours of rest on the capsule on their way home. They've been up since a little bit earlier this morning, that wake coming about 4:40 a.m. Pacific, so a little more than 8 hours ago.
And Dragon, the purge is now complete. One more Drager check, and then we should proceed with hatch opening.
Okay, good news. Thanks.
That is good news indeed. So confirmation that the purge is complete and that they're just going to do one more test to make sure that all of the fumes of concern are away and that it is safe to open that side hatch and retrieve Bob and Doug. Once again, once that side hatch is open, our flight surgeon will be the first to say hello, get a quick medical checkup, although based on the reports that that the crew have been giving us along the way, it sounds like they're doing great, they're feeling good, and they're pretty comfortable there inside a Crew Dragon.
And Dragon SpaceX, we show 0.4 parts per million on NTO, 18 parts per billion of MMH. That's below limits. We are proceeding with hatch opening.
Okay, great news. Thanks, Mike.
All right, so there's the green light we've been waiting for. In fact, the green light we've been waiting for months at this point. This is our first opportunity to say hello to Bob and Doug, our favorite space dads, as they are now about to egress or exit from Dragon Crew Endeavour. Again, this is the culmination of what has been about a 19-hour journey home, all starting yesterday as they departed the International Space Station. So this hatch will be manually opened, and once doing so, Flight Surgeon Neil Menon will say hello and make sure that they're still doing all right, and then proceed to assist them with exiting the capsule.
And we see the hatch is now open. Hatch being opened at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. Hatch is open.
So right now they're going to put a piece of equipment in there that basically smooths out the edges and makes sure that it is a comfortable exit from the Dragon capsule. Just a little piece of structure there to ensure that the hatch will remain open and that any sharp edges around that side hatch are protected.
In the blue suit there, that's one of NASA's flight surgeons for the crew. That's Dr. Stephen Hart. And that hatch open coming at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. That's 1959 Universal Time, or GMT.
So once again, the SpaceX recovery team is now assisting NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Harley to exit the spacecraft.
Sorry, we got the hatch open just about 2 minutes ago. We paused for a little while as they were just detecting some trace amounts of some of the hypergol fuels. So we executed a series of purges. And then once those were down back in acceptable limits, we were able to then start with the egress.
So there we see a stretcher on deck. This is normal. This is part of the standard recovery procedure. And it is just simply to ensure Bob and Doug remain safe. Like we said, readjusting to gravity can be a little challenging. Dizziness can often occur, especially when you're on a boat.
SpaceX Dragon, recap.
So this stretcher will just be used to as standard procedure to make sure that the astronauts make it over to the medical tent as easily and as comfortably as possible.
Yeah, as we discussed, the reintroduction to gravity from microgravity can be a bit jarring, especially on our vestibular system, so the stuff responsible for our balance. And as they are on a ship underway, we just want to make sure we're taking every possible precaution to ensure that their arrival is safe and free from any injury now that they are home. And they're working to get a few of the items from the seats out of the way first before they begin extracting our crew members. They'll be coming out one at a time.
As we saw during the ascent portion of this mission, there is enough room inside the capsule for them to do a backflip in microgravity. However, considering there's a couple folks in there right now from the recovery team.
Count check.
Got you loud and clear.
Just a Quick comm check there between Dragon and Mission Control
And
here.
Solo from the PLT, I just wanted to thank you guys for bringing us home safe before I disembarked from the ship Endeavor. I'm sure Doug will have some good words for you guys as well. But thank you for doing the most difficult parts and the most important parts of human space flight, getting us into orbit and bringing us home safely. Thank you again for the good ship Endeavor.
Thank you, Bob, for those awesome words. It's absolutely been an honor and a pleasure to work with you from the entire SpaceX team. It's been awesome.
Some initial words from NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. He's in the pilot seat, so you've heard him refer to himself as PLT. We're still standing by for our crew members to begin making their way out of the Crew Dragon spacecraft. And again, they're going to get some assistance just the couple of feet to the medical quarters on board the ship, where they're going to be able to get out of their suits that they've been wearing for all of the final dynamic phases of the separation events, deorbit burn, re-entry, splashing down just a little over an hour ago at 11:48 p.m. or a.m. Pacific time.
Again, the recovery team.
SpaceX Dragon from the commander.
Go for SpaceX.
There we have our first view of Doug
Mike,
Hurley.
I just would like to sort of reiterate what Bob said and add my thanks to everybody over the last several years that's either worked in Hawthorne, McGregor, or down at Kennedy Space Center. Anybody who's touched Endeavor, you should take a moment to just cherish this day, especially given all the things that have happened this year. We certainly can't thank you enough. Our families can't thank you enough. And, just proud to be a small part of this whole effort to get accompany people to and from the space station. They can celebrate with each other.
You see some.
And we'll talk to you soon, hopefully in person.
Thanks so much, Doug, and you're welcome, and thank you so much for those kind words. And we all wish you a safe journey home and a happy reunion with your family soon, and we look forward to seeing you in person as well.
Some really nice words there from Bob Behnken.
Mikey.
There on your screen.
Thumbs up all the way, as they've been giving us some regular status updates from inside the capsule. They've been feeling really good. And so now we're just standing by for our spacecraft commander, Doug Hurley, to make his way out into the fresh air for the first time in 64 days. All right, so they're getting set up, and we should see spacecraft commander Doug Hurley making his way out of the capsule. And it looks like we've got him out. We've got him seated. we go, another thumbs up. We've got some applause here.
And as you can see in Mission Control, a standing ovation for a job well done all around.
Yeah, our crew members, Bob and Doug, are now safely back home on Earth, and they're going to get checked out now by the NASA medical team. They're going straight into the medical quarters on board the ship. That'll be their first stop on planet Earth, and then they're going to be making their way up into a helicopter and then heading back to dry land. So once they're complete, the team's going to prepare Dragon itself, and they're going to begin taking it back to shore. It's been an incredible mission. This all kicked off just 2 months ago on May 30th from Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We had a successful liftoff. We had to dodge around some weather. It was suspenseful, clearing up the last possible moment. They had a flawless ride to orbit, a 19-hour journey to the International Space Station, where they just spent 62 days on board, 64 total days in space. They were Expedition 63 crew members doing science experiments, spacewalks, repairs, everything on board the orbiting laboratory.
Their journey home began yesterday when they closed the hatch to Dragon and undocked hours later at 4:35 p.m. Pacific. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Bob and Doug rested up before waking up for re-entry earlier this morning. We successfully jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the deorbit burn, at 10:56 a.m. Pacific to send Dragon on the path home. The spacecraft successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 mains, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Pensacola, Florida at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, right on time. Following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts quickly move in and prepare Dragon Endeavour for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Bob Behnken and Doug Harley make their way, thumbs up, out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
Yeah, we just got word that the helicopter itself should be landing soon, so that'll be their next step in their journey. They'll catch a short flight back to shore where they're going to transfer to a waiting NASA plane for another short flight back over to Houston. They're going to be reunited with their families, and that's going to bring an end to this historic flight. It's really been an honor and a privilege to share this journey with all of you as we open up this new era in human space flight. But I mean, just as we close the book on this mission, we're already counting down the days to the next Crew Dragon flight.
Yeah, absolutely. SpaceX and NASA will now begin the process of reviewing data and telemetry from this successful demonstration mission to prepare us for Crew 1, which is currently targeted to launch no earlier than late September. Crew 1 will be SpaceX's first operational flight, flying a full crew of 4 astronauts, including our first from Japan, one of the international partners on the space station. The mission will last approximately 6 months. It has been an incredible honor and joy to share this mission with the public, and the teams from SpaceX and NASA have worked so hard to get here and return this capability to fly humans from America. Continue to follow SpaceX and NASA online and on our social media updates for the next steps on the commercial crew program and the countdown to Crew 1.
And we're going to continue to share the progress of Bob and Doug's trip back to Houston on social media. We also have a briefing coming up real soon. It's going to include NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine and officials from NASA and SpaceX. That's coming up right at the bottom of the hour, 1:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 20:30 GMT. So we're going to say thanks one more time for tuning in, cheering on Bob and Doug as they return home. And we'll see you next time when we'll once again be sending astronauts on American rockets in American spacecraft from American soil. So long.
Information there, back and forth from Mission Control here to Bob and Doug up in Dragon Endeavour. That Bob and Doug have also confirmed on their displays that the nose cone has closed nominally and it is secure for entry.
All right, so that nose cone close completion A lot of tongue twisters with this right now. Coming with Dragon still flying over the South Pacific. It is on its way home. We're going to gradually start to see its altitude dip. Right now, already only 207 miles over the Earth's surface. It was at about 260 miles when it was still over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean off the southwestern coast of Australia when it fired its engines for that deorbit burn. So its altitude going to continue to drop. Once it gets to about 100 kilometers in altitude, or about 62 miles, it's going to begin what's known as entry interface. And that's when it really begins to start to feel the effects of the Earth's atmosphere. Will once again be experiencing lift and drag as it's no longer in that near vacuum environment in low Earth orbit.
So we're essentially
station. In fact, Bob and Station Commander Chris Cassidy completed several spacewalks, and they've also been taking some really spectacular photos of planet Earth and the Dragon spacecraft as it's been in attached operations. We'll have a chance to share some of those later on in the broadcast.
And I can't believe it, but it's already been 63 days since they arrived in space, so they are just entering the final phase of their mission in just a few hours from now and have been preparing for over the last 2 weeks for their return flight. Today on board the space station is the Expedition 63 crew, led by NASA's Chris Cassidy and joined by Russian cosmonauts Anatoly Ivanishin and Ivan Wagner, and of course, Bob Behnken and Doug Harley.
Now, while all the crew have been busy aboard, the ground teams have also been performing a number of checkouts in preparation for departure today. These checkouts have been going on over the last several days, and in fact, last week. They've included inspections of the heat shield, checkouts of the suits, some checkouts of the comm systems, as well as a number of activation procedures on the life support system on the vehicle, and cargo loading, which has been really cool. Actually, why don't we check in with Gary at Johnson Space Center? He can let us know how the station crew have been preparing and what we can expect from here. Gary?
Thank you, Shiva and Leah, and welcome inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Since arriving at the space station, Bob and Doug jumped right in as fully fledged members of Expedition 63. Over the last 2 months, they've helped execute more than 24 scientific investigations from every major category of research aboard the station, including studies in biology and biotechnology, earth and space sciences, human research, physical sciences, and technology demonstration. They've also had plenty of non-science-related work on their timelines, performing maintenance on life support and vehicle hardware in multiple modules and transferring cargo in and out of the attached HTV-9 cargo spacecraft. Bob Behnken also executed 4 spacewalks with Station Commander Chris Cassidy, wrapping up one of the final phases of upgrading the station's large external batteries, with Doug assisting in all suit and robotic operations. Since completing the spacewalks, Bob and Doug have spent the last 2 weeks preparing to come home. They received some additional on-orbit training to refresh them on the departure, re-entry, and splashdown procedures, and have been busy packing cargo for their return. In fact, that's what they're doing right now. There will be approximately 150 kilograms or 330 pounds of cargo returning on Dragon. The majority of that is more than 200 pounds of science, largely made up of samples packed away into powered cold freezers. These samples are from a range of biological research experiments on the station dedicated to improving our understanding of how the human body adapts to microgravity, or looking at ways to use space to improve life back here on Earth. Now, let's go through some of the major upcoming milestones for today's departure coming up soon at just around 2:35 p.m. Pacific. We're currently awaiting Bob and Doug to ingress or board the station, or board the Dragon for their return flight home. They're doing a little bit of closeout duties now, but that'll be one of the first items on their agenda today. So less than 30 minutes from now, they'll be closing Dragon's hatch around 2:45 p.m. Pacific time. Once inside the vehicle, Bob and Doug will don their SpaceX spacesuits, which will be worn worn during all dynamic phases of the flight. All those same leak checks on the spacecraft would occur before the crew makes their way into the seats and straps in for undocking. Once the Dragon's hatch is closed, Chris Cassidy will affix a docking target to the outside of the A-Pass hatch and then close it about 10 minutes later, 2:55 p.m. Pacific, creating a space between the Dragon and station known as the vestibule. He then has one more hatch to close. That's the node 2. All of those hatches are closed. About 15 minutes later, a ground command will be sent to open the valves on the Dragon side and begin depressurization. That's at 3:10 p.m. Pacific, essentially venting air inside and bringing that space down close to vacuum. They have to pause for 5 psi for a few minutes, allowing the temperature inside that vestibule to stabilize, perform a good leak check, and then continue depressurization. 4:20 p.m. Central Time, they'll conduct a go, no-go poll. That'll be the NASA teams here in Mission Control Houston and SpaceX teams in Hawthorne. If all is go, the undocking sequence begins. The undocking command will be sent, followed by a few minutes for the umbilical that connects the power and data between the two spacecraft to detach. 12 hooks will retract, and then 2 firings of Dragon's thrusters will initiate, and the undocking will be complete. That separation scheduled for 4:34 p.m. Pacific time. Now, the departure burn, there's 4 departure burns. Immediately after those 2 burns, they'll actually have that physical separation, and the departure burns will take them around the zenith side of the International Space Station. Those departure burns taking place, there's 4 of them, and will be taking place over the first few hours of their flight, essentially getting that Dragon further away from the International Space Station. Now, overnight, the crew will be able to get a sleep period in. In fact, this orbital trajectory gives them plenty of time to allow for the crew's sleep, to get them in a good circadian rhythm, and allow them to perform all of their tasks prior to splashdown, including while they are asleep. They're going to also be performing a phase burn. Right now, they're in the orbital plane of the International Space Station, but that phase burn will align them with their primary landing site. Right now, we're looking go for Pensacola, just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. They'll perform a series of checks right upon waking up when that phase burn occurs while they are asleep. Those checks, they'll put on their suits and get ready for the deorbit sequence. The deorbit sequence is, there's a few steps there. First, there's going to be the preparation for the claw separation. There's the Dragon's trunk. They're going to perform a heavy yaw of the Dragon vehicle and release the Dragon trunk off to the side so it doesn't intersect with the vehicle during the deorbit sequence. Align Dragon back up with the orbital plane and fire the forward bulkhead Dracos. This will be one of the longest burns, and that is the deorbit burn, almost more than actually 11 minutes long. And that will slow them down enough. They'll position Dragon for re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, and then the re-entry sequence will begin. Of course, before they do that, they do have to close the nose cone. So after they close the nose cone, they'll go through the atmosphere, shoot the drogue parachutes, main parachutes, and then splash down. That's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, Sunday afternoon, around 1:48 p.m. Central Time, 11:48 a.m. Pacific Time. Then the recovery operations begin. After that, Bob and Doug will be back on planet Earth. Now, Station Commander Chris Cassidy will be watching the undocking and departure burn from the cupola, but the prime monitoring role falls to Bob and Doug. Flight controllers in Mission Control Houston will be backing them up. Now, as you've heard several times, Dragon's flight is intended to be autonomous, but the crew on board has the ability to take control and maneuver Dragon during the departure if necessary. On the station side, we're looking good. Solar arrays are locked in place. We have good communication links, and all station systems are looking healthy. Attitude will remain on U.S. control until the time of undocking, when we'll switch to control moment gyros only. We're tracking no issues for an on-time departure here in Mission Control Houston. Now back to Shiva and Leah in Hawthorne.
Good copy. And finally,
so right now on your screen is a view of mission control. That's actually where the ground controllers are all operating. Actually, why don't we listen into the nets for a second? I think there's some chatter happening there.
Copy. Thanks. We're going to start 2.103, assuming we have a go.
You are go.
I believe I just heard a go call on the FD net, but I think we're still in the process of assessing vehicle health and actually making sure that Bob and Doug can ingress the capsule, which should be underway currently.
So with Dragon's ingress operations now underway, we're about 10 minutes to hatch closure and about 2 hours until Dragon departs the International Space Station at 4:34 p.m. Pacific time. So next up for Bob and Doug, they need to get in their spacesuits.
Yeah, and actually the suit's primary function is to protect the crew in the case of a cabin depressurization. If that were to occur, then the suits actually inflate with either a combination of nitrogen and oxygen, or oxygen depending on the pressure in the cabin. And they give them a habitable environment long enough to get home safely in an emergency scenario. The external portion of the suit is also flame retardant as well, so if there were a fire on board the vehicle, the suits would help provide the crew some protection in that event. The suits are actually really cool. They're very aesthetically designed and actually designed in-house here at SpaceX.
Yeah, they're definitely very sleek. The crew has actually been really busy all day as they have been preparing to leave. Got up this morning. It's actually evening on the International Space Station right now. And they got up and started working out. All the astronauts on the space station have to work out for 2 hours a day, every day, to make sure that they keep up their bone strength and their muscle strength so that way they can walk when they get back home. And so they got up, got the opportunity to do that. Bob Behnken transferred some emergency equipment from Dragon into the space station. They keep that emergency equipment in there just in case they ever needed to make a quick, speedy getaway in Dragon or take a safe haven in that space in case something were to happen in the International Space Station.
Yeah, and Leah, you mentioned the idea of safe haven. Actually, a couple of the visiting vehicles, either the Soyuz vehicle and the Dragon vehicle, when they're attached to the space station, can provide the crew with a place to hole up if there were an emergency on the station or if there was a leak or a fire or depressurization event. And so some of that emergency equipment is stored in the vehicle for quick access in case they needed to get inside very quickly. And the crew actually train pretty rigorously on those emergency scenarios, getting in quickly under all kinds of visibility scenarios and checking that their crewmates are safely aboard in their vehicles as well. We had a chance to do some training with the crew actually here in Hawthorne earlier for the Crew 1 crew earlier this month. So, and just a quick recap of kind of what's coming up next. So Bob and Doug going through the ingress operations right now. Coming up, planned about 2:35 p.m. Pacific time is hatch closure. So that's where we will close the forward hatch on the Dragon spacecraft. And then following that will be closure of the APAS hatch.
And after we close the APAS hatch there, that's on the space station side. We'll have the space station crew be working on that. We'll go for vestibule depressurization, and the vestibule is that space in between the hatches that the crew flies through when they arrive and then, of course, when they leave. But we are going to bring that space, which is the same pressurization as the rest of the space station, down to as close to a vacuum as possible because that's what it will be exposed to once Crew Dragon departs, hopefully in just a couple of hours.
Yeah, right now the planned departure and is looking like around 4:34 or 4:35 p.m. Pacific time. And that's when we're hoping to see Dragon do some small undocking burns that will separate it from the space station. On your screen is actually a view from inside the space station looking down node 2 towards the pressurized mating adapter. I think I saw Chris Cassidy in the view there, and I think those are his other expedition crewmates on board.
Yes.
And Bob and Doug probably inside the capsule at this point.
Yes, that looks to be Chris Cassidy over on the left, and then Anatoly Ivanishin and Yvonne Wagner upside down, or what feels like upside down to us, but really there's no up or down in space.
That's got to be nice.
Yeah, I know, right? And both the hatches still open, so we'll be waiting for that hatch closure.
Yeah, and actually, I think you can see that's probably the APAS hatch. If you look just past where all the ISS crew are, I believe that's the APAS hatch that's sort of coming up, kind of that white circle. And Chris Cassidy will actually have some tasks to attach a docking target onto that when we're ready to close the APAS hatch. Looks like he might be hopping into Dragon to help out with some work inside the capsule for securing. Now, we mentioned earlier today, Bob and Doug have been busy today. They've actually been busy as well stowing cargo on the vehicle. Just listening into the nets right now, it looks like they're actually going through life support activation. So I just heard a call out that carbon dioxide levels are coming down, which means that our life support system is actively taking in air from the cabin and revitalizing it so Bob and Doug can breathe nicely on board.
So just some statistics while we're thinking about it. Obviously, we mentioned that Crew Dragon has been on board the station for 63 days now. Feels like yesterday. And during that time, Bob and Doug have traveled over 27 million statute miles around the Earth. So
that's incredible.
Frequent flyers, I would say.
Yeah. Do you get is there a frequent flyer pass for Dragon? I hope so. Yeah, and they're zipping around. I think on ground track they're going about 17,500 kilometers when they're at ISS's orbital altitude. That sounds about right.
Yeah, I think it's 17,500 miles an hour.
I'm sorry, miles per hour. Thank you.
It's still extremely fast. So if you look just above the hatch, you see that ISS 20 flag. That is representing the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station, which we will actually be celebrating later this year. So for the past 20 years, I like to explain it to people as if you are under 20 years of age, you've never lived a day without humans in space. So for the past 20 years, we've had continuous human presence aboard the International Space Station. It's truly international. We have obviously our two upside down friends we see. They're getting a better look inside by turning in that direction. They are from Roscosmos, the Russian space agency. Looks like they are taking out the intermodule ventilation. That helps equalize the air in between Dragon's capsule and the rest of the International Space Station.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, while Dragon has been attached to the space station, most of its operations have been in what we call quiescent mode. So that's really just a low power state where we've only got monitoring on the thermal system, the propellant system, taking a look at some parameters in case we were to see anything that would trigger the Dragon's onboard automation to wake the vehicle up and let ground operators know something needs to be addressed. The onboard life support system is actually only used when we close the hatches and for brief periods when we are configuring the vehicle when we first arrive and periods when we're leaving, like right now. So that duct that they pull out, the intermodule ventilation duct, that actually provides clean, breathable air and circulates the air in the capsules. And providing that air from the International Space Station.
And it looks like hatch closure is soon to be underway.
Houston and Hawthorne from Endeavour.
Still working to take out some equipment inside Dragon, move it back into the space station.
Yeah, so as part of those activities, moving the intermodule ventilation duct, they activated, of course, the lithium hydroxide scrubbers on board Dragon. Cap and fan has been running. And I think we're just waiting on confirmation of hatch closure.
Yes, and I think they just called down that they are working on that, putting that into motion. We're getting one step closer to sending Bob and Doug home.
Closed for Endeavour.
SpaceX copies.
And Houston copies.
And we just got confirmation that Capsule Endeavour has closed the forward hatch. We can actually see on our screen the activities to close the APAS hatch as well.
And that Crew Dragon hatch closure came at 2:36 p.m. Pacific time as the International Space Station was flying over the North Atlantic Ocean.
Now, as part of hatch closure operations, Bob and Doug actually inspected the seal on the interior surface of the of the forward hatch on Dragon. And we're talking about the forward hatch and the side hatch. The forward hatch is actually the part that's attached to the front, sort of the front portion of the International Space Station. So if you imagine the International Space Station flying in a direction around the Earth, the forward direction of it is what we're attached to. And that, if you were imagining the capsule sitting on the rocket, is actually at the very top of the rocket underneath the nose cone. So if you're imagining the rocket as it was on the launch pad, it's a little bit sideways right now. And there's a sealing surface on that forward hatch that Bob and Doug would have done an inspection on, just to make sure that there's no foreign object debris or FOD that could cause a potential leak.
And looks like we may be stepping into a satellite handover. It happens commonly on the International Space Station, and it's called actually a TDRS handover, Tracking Data and Relay Satellite System. We're constantly moving from one to the next.
Yeah, so we actually use those tracking and data relay satellites as well on the Dragon vehicle. They provide our telemetry links. There's I believe they're in the GeoBelt. Hopefully that's correct. But they provide communications, uplink and downlink and commanding, actually, a downlink for us to command the vehicle as well if we need to step in on the ground side. Speaking of which, we actually have a view of mission controls in Hawthorne. So that is that's where our mission controllers are in Hawthorne. The folks who are issuing commands to the Dragon spacecraft are all sitting. In the third row there is the mission director, as well as, and here's an internal view of the Dragon spacecraft. We've got Bob in his, looks like his comfort garment, which would be what he wears underneath his suit. Nice to see the capsule getting all packed up.
And then another view from the International Space Station side of things. Looks like Anatoly Ivanishin flying out of view, and Chris Cassidy down there in between the hatches in that vessel. He is working through procedures to soon be closing the A-Pass hatch on the space station side and prepare for depressurization.
Dragon SpaceX, no response.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit.
On cameras for your suit donning.
Copy, SpaceX. Thank you.
Now, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the vestibule, the space between the A-Pass hatch and the forward hatch on Dragon is really just a small volume that is normally exposed to the vacuum of space when we don't have a visiting vehicle like the Dragon spacecraft. And we have to step through some depressurization steps once we have confirmed that all of those hatches are secured, both on the International Space Station side as well as on the Dragon side of the spacecraft.
So we just heard the call that Bob and Doug are go for suit donning. So the Dragon hatch is closed. They've said farewell to their orbiting friends for now until they're all reunited in the ground in the future. And they'll be going through that suit donning shortly. You did mention it looked like Bob Behnken was already in his comfort garment, that first layer of the suit.
Yeah, the comfort garment is it's basically like an athletic garment. Just helps them stay comfortable before they step into the suit. And the suit is largely a one-piece design. So the helmet is integrated into it. The boots are integrated into it. Really, they will unzip some interfaces on the suit, climb into it, zip all those attachment points up, and then there's actually an umbilical on the leg of the suit, so it's a kind of a connection that provides gases and electrical connections to the suit, so they can use the integrated microphones in their helmets, and it also provides them breathable gases for suit leak checks, and if we were to have one of those emergency scenarios, it would also provide pressurization to the suit. And I think notable to mention that these are different suits from what you might imagine for like the spacewalks and EVA suits. These are what are called intravehicular activity suits, meant for really activity inside the vehicle.
So what we just saw as Chris Cassidy was down there in between the hatches in that vestibule space, he was affixing that docking target that we mentioned earlier. I like to say it's like an X marks the spot because that's what the vehicles aim for when they arrive at the International Space Station. So one step closer to bringing Bob and Doug home. And we're actually really fortunate that the weather has turned out pretty good in the Gulf. Looking at a Pensacola landing site right now, we just, before we went on air today, we had the 2.5 hour prior to undocking weather briefing, and things are still looking good for an on-time departure today.
Yeah, really glad to see the weather cleared up. Storm moved back towards the Atlantic.